Papa anymore. The truth is, that's not who I am. I'm a retired construction entrepreneur. I have a lovely family. I have financial resources, and I have a passion for making Louisiana a better place. I'm one of many people who engage in politics and policy. And my area of interest has been in education, as most of you know, and for the last 20 years, constitutional reform. So let's start with 5 things that we can objectively agree that there's broad consensus on. First, the Louisiana state constitution is broken. And this is not news. It's been a serious and bipartisan problem and discussion for a long time. In fact, the opponents of the convention of 2024 begin with, "There's no doubt we have a problem." A state constitution should be very simple to stand the test of time. That is, it defines the right of the citizenry, and it defines the form and function of government, and nothing more in reality. In fact, a simple Google search was revealed that what should a state constitution do? State constitutions delineate the powers of state government and how they are to be exercised. They contain key components essential for state governance, including a Bill of Rights, parameters for elections and taxation, as well as the establishment and regulation of organs of government. Louisiana's Constitution is not that. It's long, it's cluttered, it contains far too much policy. We don't have a Constitution, really. We have a set of laws that we've given constitutional authority. The Massachusetts Constitution, which was ratified in 1780, is almost 250 years old. It's been amended half as much as the 1973, which is only 50 years old, has been amended. That's the test of time. The second thing we can agree on, the state's physical house is a mess. We have a complex and uncompetitive tax code and budget process. And it's made a mess in part because of the Constitution. This is a view shared broadly by legislators and the general public from all walks of life. For example, 9 out of every $10 in our $50 billion state budget is already pre-spent before the legislatures walk into the building. Now think about that. Suppose that your small business or your household budget, that 9 out of every $10 had already been pre-spent without any concern for your desires or expenses. And so imagine this. Suppose your crazy uncle 50 years ago decided how to spend those dollars. He didn't know anything about Netflix. He didn't know anything about cell phones or internet. It wouldn't be very pleasant. But that's what we have, and it's the situation that we put our legislators in. And so what do we end up with? First, we'll unplug the dialysis machines. No, that's not a good idea. Let's cancel LSU football. No, that really won't work either. Let's raise taxes. And that's our problem. The third thing that we can all agree upon is that Louisiana is moving in the wrong direction. Poll after poll, 60, 75% of the voters consistently say that the state's headed in the wrong direction and that we need transformational change. Fourth, there are too many amendments to the Constitution, and too many of them are being proposed as we stand here. Now, this isn't controversial in any room. The voters are tired of the ongoing constitutional smorgasbord. As a sidebar, people ask me, we got 4 constitutional amendments. What do you think about them? And I begin to explain constitutional amendment number 283. And they say, don't explain it, just tell me, do I vote yes or no? They want a scorecard. They're not interested. They don't want to run the state. And the fifth thing that we can agree upon, and I hope we all focus on this because I think it might be one of our biggest problems, but it's there. The status quo, special interests have a stranglehold on our state government. The government that Huey Long built 100 years ago enshrined the concept that you had to come to Baton Rouge and kiss the ring to get your money. And over the course of the last 50 years, all sorts of interests have carved out their piece of the pie into our current Constitution, and they rally hard to protect it. So if we have a broad consensus on the problems we're trying to solve, two big questions remain. What should we do about it, and when should we do it? And there are several options on the table when it comes to what we should do about it. One option is to take everything piecemeal, carve out a piece of the Constitution, write a constitutional amendments, and let the voters decide upon it. They don't want that stream of constitutional amendments to vote on every year. And furthermore, when you do it article by article, you'll lose the opportunity to cast a holistic view of state government. And the special interests are likely to kill more than they can because they can aim their fire in one place. I can speak from experience. It's a lot easier to kill an idea than it is to pass proactive policy. Another option is to do nothing. At present, maintain the status quo is the option on the table, and the one it seems to be preferred by the state Senate. We know the outcome of doing nothing. The old adage, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is insanity. But I can tell you what doing nothing does. It emboldens the special interest and it cements status quo. Or we could call a convention focused on streamlining and refreshing the Constitution. This is a solution that has broadest support, and I believe will yield the best results for Louisiana by moving large portions of policy decisions back to statute, where they belong, and where most other states have them. We can have a real Constitution, and we can empower lawmakers to do their jobs and reflect the priorities of their constituents. This is the approach supported by the governor and by the House of Representatives, who passed this by a supermajority of 75 votes. And if Tony Bockley had been there, it would have been 76 votes. It's also supported by a wide variety of policy organizations like PAR, like Cable, like LABI, like the Family Foreman, Americans for Prosperity, the Pelican Institute. That's a majority of policy organizations. Don't want to get lost. If we're to call that Constitution Convention and work to streamline and refresh our Constitution, the question is when. As I mentioned, this is a debate that's gone on for 20 years, but we have a window of opportunity right in front of us right now. The best time to ask voters to ratify or reject a constitutional framework is in the election during which the most voters will be there, and that is a presidential ballot. Of course, you know, we could offer it up in an off year, and maybe those of us who support Chancellor would have a better opportunity because fewer people would go to vote. But don't you think it's really right that the most people cast a ballot about such an important issue? Furthermore, y'all might be aware that we have a fiscal session coming up in 2025, and we have some things to be dealt with, shortfalls, maybe $500 million. Streamlining the Constitution at this time will free up the legislature to debate the right tax and budget policies without the handcuffs currently in our cluttered document. And remember this is a high priority of the voters who sent lawmakers to enact bold and transformational change. So I put a challenge in front of the legislature. And really, this is aimed at the Senate, who has, despite overwhelming support in the House, refused to give the convention the courtesy of an open debate. Third graders know that we're in trouble, probably because their favorite cousin and uncles have had to leave to find better opportunities in other places. And 10th graders studying Louisiana governance and our Constitution are well aware of where the problem is. And most everybody agrees with the solution. The governor, the House, policy organizations, and much of the public. And in my private conversations, most senators are even for it. It's not complicated. The path forward is simple. And there's time, not much time, but there is time to do it. This is a time for statesmen to rise above parochial politics and, importantly, the status quo special interests that have long had a grip on the state government and enshrined that grip in a long, bloated, ineffective Constitution that is hurting our state. It's time for statesmen to do the work that will benefit the state today, and more importantly, their kids and grandkids who may not even be born yet, but who will reap the benefits of a more functional, more stable, and more prosperous state. It's time for statesmen to get back to work, to call themselves into a Constitution Convention and deliver on a promise of transformational change. Thank you. I'll take any questions. Yes, sir.
Mr. Grigsby, I was a member of the Baton Press Club, a general member of LABI for over 20 years, member of PAR. You're making general statements about our Constitution and it's unfunctional and can't work. But I didn't, let me say this, Donald Trump says he was elected by a larger margin than ever before. But that's the opposite of what happened in our state. And my representative and I did not talk about whether or not LSU's ticket prices should be shared with ULL. I didn't talk to him about whether or not a guy that can't walk across a room because he's in a wheelchair, a nursing home, should go to work when LSU students might have to get an extra job. So why don't you pass an amendment that puts that in front of us? Because as far as I was concerned with my representative, all that was settled over many years. And I don't trust this legislature. So why don't you send an amendment to us that says we want to allow this to happen, allow that to happen?
I wish that I understood your question.
Yeah, why don't you pass an amendment that says we want to take nursing homes out of the Constitution. We want to take LSU out of the Constitution. We want to take firefighters' widows and police officers' widows that died in the line of service. We want to take that out of the Constitution so we can do whatever we want. We want to take the savings accounts out of the Constitution that you all passed, and we want to do it as a small group that was elected not by an overwhelming majority like Donald Trump says he got, but it was just a regular election that occurred recently.
I'll try to answer the question. It's why don't we let the people of Louisiana make all the decisions instead of a small legislature? That's called pure democracy. It doesn't function very well. Most people voting aren't really informed, carefully informed about the issues that they're voting on, and they don't end up with good results. Any other questions? Please.
Excuse me, do you feel like Governor Landry is fully behind your plan for amending the state constitution?
If you said, do I think that Governor Landry is fully behind, you stuck an adjective in there, I'm not sure I can ever tell you that. He has told me many times that he understands the depth of this problem. This is not a Band-Aid that we can put on it. We've got to do something transformational. He's never said, be quiet. And I would imagine I give people that opportunity. Please.
Megan Freeman with the Advocate. I was wondering if you think the sales tax exemption on food, medicine, and utilities should stay in the Constitution?
Generally speaking, policy should not be in the Constitution. Everybody wants to leave their portion in the Constitution. I liked what the President of the Senate said not too long ago. He says, everybody's for change as long as it doesn't make any difference. Please.
Theoretically, how long do you think such a session would be? If there is a special session, how long do you think that would be? How long do you think it should take for something like that?
Well, it can be done in 2 weeks because it's not real complicated. We're not going to redraw a constitution. All you're going to look is an item and say, should this be in a constitution or should we make it statute, super statute? Now, think about what that does. You move it out of the Constitution, you make it super statute, which means that 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate have got to agree on it to change it at all. Which means that to stop it takes 14 senators. Now, if I can't convince 14 senators that it's not a good idea, then maybe it is a good idea. Please.
There's talk of doing away with the income tax, so that would open up another stream of revenue that we'd have to replace. Right now, Louisiana has very low property tax, so it looks like sales tax would be the main avenue. What are your thoughts about those conversations right now?
Part of the reason her question is Secretary Richard Nelson is trying to figure a way out how we can eliminate the income tax. And when you eliminate one revenue stream, you've got to have another to replace it, I believe is your question. And the problem is that we can't look holistically at our revenue stream. We have to look at it one piece at a time. And we can't look at the budget process. You see, you don't always have to replace a revenue stream if you can cut cost. So we have a budget that's basically started over every year. This is what I got last year. How much can I get this year? We have agencies that spend money before year end because if they don't spend it, it'll come out of their budget next year. So it's not just replace one revenue stream with another. Why don't we look at reducing costs, especially since we haven't reviewed our total budget in my lifetime.
And on that, so this would essentially open up some of those constitutionally protected, like K through 12, LDH.
Everything that's in the Constitution, which is policy, should be moved over into statute and be available for the legislature to look at through careful evaluation and debate. Right now, they have to go and take one specific item and go to the people for an amendment to get the authority to look at it. All we're saying is, and I understand, people in Louisiana 50 years ago didn't trust our legislature at all. But we didn't have the internet and we didn't have social media. Today, if the speaker sneezes, before he gets the handkerchief to his nose, it's on the internet. It's not like they're going to go over there and do things, drastic things that we don't have any idea about. And they're very responsive to the voters. We have the most active voters in Louisiana. Politics is a sport in Louisiana. Everybody's engaged in it. Please, sir.
I'm understanding that if we want to get this on the November ballot, that we got to have specific people got to look at it. What do you believe is the best way to give widespread views to what will be the voting
Well, do you think that in November it'll be a surprise? It's got to be out at least by the 23rd of August, or it doesn't get on the ballot. And if you got from the 23rd of August till the 5th of November, you can look at everything that's being proposed. It'll be fully defined.
Can we start getting that out now?
Well, it hadn't been developed. They haven't met. They haven't reformed and refreshed the Constitution. Part of what we did last week, we put out the working that we had with regard to the transition committee. We put it out to everybody. It's a working document. It's got lots of things in it. There is no final product to be looked at until we have a convention. And at the convention, people will have plenty of opportunity to have input.
Mr. Grigsby, what makes you think that voters would approve this kind of open-ended, removing constitutional stuff and say, no, let the legislature handle this? There's already a suspicion of financial. One of the big constitutional amendments that was up involving finances was the only one that got voted down this last time. So what makes you think people would vote for it?
When we began this, I had 78 hurdles. I knew the last really big hurdle is going to be getting the people to approve a constitution that gives the legislature an opportunity to fix our problems. Because an awful lot of people in Louisiana don't want to fix our problems. An awful lot of people have their part of the pie, and they want to save it. So I understand the difficulties that should we get a convention, and should that convention result in a constitutional, draft constitutional reform to put in front of the people, it's going to take an awful lot of convincing and education of the public to show them the way that instead of doing the same thing over and over again, we might get different results if we have a different document. In the back, please.
Explain why the changes you're proposing for the Constitution will not increase the power of special interest groups. I think the public wants to decrease, and what we hear more and more is it increases what's being proposed to help special interest groups, particularly those in the House and the Senate.
And I totally agree with you. Her question is, if we give the House and Senate more authority, won't the special interest and status quo people have free reign? Is that a fair statement of your question?
More power.
More power. Well, and my belief is in the process of electing individuals, legislators and senators. And right now, they can stand up and say, I can't do anything about it. It's in the Constitution. You can't argue with it. But if you give them that opportunity and then they abuse it, there are repercussions of that kind of behavior. I honestly believe that we've got an awful lot of statesmen who've offered to be public servants, who go to Baton Rouge and spend a lot of time because they are like I am. They really want to make Louisiana a better place. It's possible. We've got everything here. People don't leave Louisiana because they don't like our food, and they don't leave here because they don't like football. They leave here because they don't have an opportunity. And by the way, the people leaving here are not our old people, and they're not the people that are the future. They are the people that are our future, rather. They're our young people, our most talented young people, because there's a better opportunity in another state. Aren't we tired of being, did y'all read in the paper? We went from 48th to 47th this year. We're making progress. Please, sir.
To what degree, if any, do you feel that Governor Landry's efforts to choke off access to public records in this last legislative session may have cast a dark cloud over your efforts? And can you tell us, do you agree or disagree with his efforts in that regard?
Well, let's talk about public records that need to be out in front of everybody. I think the most recent one is he didn't file the fact that he used Mr. Boyce and Bollinger's airplane to go to see our troops on the Rio Grande River. You know, and I understand. And there's been, I think in his terms, not very long, like an 800% increase in requests for public documents than it was in the last one. You can use, I need to see everything there is about you, to an abuse. So I don't think that his desire not to be harassed by the liberals has anything to do with the effort of the Constitution reform.
Well, with all due respect, sir, Senator Cloud's bill expanded to all government operations. It was certainly not restricted just to government.
Did it pass?
Pardon?
Did it pass?
It did not pass, but there, the Senate can be thanked for that, I guess.
I'll be honest with you. You're in an area that's not my area of expertise. I don't know when to keep my mouth shut. But I tried.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Lane? Hi, Piper Hutchinson, Louisiana Luminator. You're calling for the legislature to come into a special session to address the Constitution. This legislature was elected under maps that violate the Voting Rights Act, and voting rights activists have said that the idea of a constitutional convention is a grievous offense against democracy. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't have any. Her question was that there's a group that doesn't believe that the map that presently is used to elect our legislators.
Correct. It was ruled to violate the Voting Rights Act. I judge.
The House and Senate are not legitimate.
A judge ruled that those maps violated the Voting Rights Act.
Again, you're in an area that I'm not prepared to address. I just don't know the answer to your question. Please.
To what extent, if any, do you believe folks in the legislature who are still adherents of the no new taxes kind of play the full motion that would hammer the ability to actually do something about the new tax constitution?
I'm not sure I really understood that question. I believe that right now the legislature is handcuffed by the state constitution with regard to revenue streams. They can do one of three things: reduce health care, which we're not going to do away with higher education, which we're not going to do, or raise taxes. So I don't think there's anybody down there saying no new taxes. They do. But the fact of the matter is, with the options that we allow to the legislature and the needs of this state. And let me pause right here and add one more thing. We talk about a new tax, and they say, let's business taxes. I will guarantee you that when we put a tax on oil and gas, Exxon does not have a little drawer that they go get some state tax dollars from and give to the Louisiana people. They put it in the price of the gasoline. So one thing when we start talking about raising taxes, it's not like we're raising taxes on some unknown entity. We're raising taxes on ourselves.
When you talk about special interests, which in particular are you concerned about?
I don't have a vest on. Our question was, when I talk about special interest or status quo groups, which am I talking about? There's no reason to create animosity among groups. Most people who are special interests or status quo honestly believe in what they're doing. And so picking them out and identifying them as black hats wouldn't serve a useful purpose.
In the event that it's not successful in having a special session for the Constitutional Convention, would you be supportive of Revenue Secretary Nelson's plan to have a special session to basically rewrite the revenue code and so forth? I know that's a fallback, that's not your preference, but would you be supportive of it?
You know, I haven't seen it in its fullness, because as you might have heard me speak, Article 6 deals with our budgetary process. And I think looking at Article 7 only is an inappropriate way to run a business.
Like, you've spoken a lot about things you'd like to see, or what you'd like to see come out of the Constitution, what would be one thing you would like to see put in that's not fixed out?
The question is, we're talking about things that are in the Constitution which could be relocated to statute. Are there things that need to be addressed, either added to or revised within the Constitution? This is a great question. It ought to be given careful thought. Article 5 is the judicial area. I've been fed some information, so I'm going to report it, and it might not be quite accurate, but are you aware that the number of appellate judges in New Orleans is greater than the number of judges in Alabama? The number of appellate judges in Louisiana is 800% more than the next state, which is Ohio. So we need, and by the way, are you aware that some of the district judgeships have 25,000 constituents and some of them have 8,000? That's not fair. Oh, and cost, court costs, they go up all the time. Are you aware of how they're spent or even how much they are? No. So I really believe that it doesn't take long. There are examples of rewrites and additions to Article 5 that should be looked at. I'm going to be honest with you. I also think that the amending process to our Constitution is one of our big problems. Some states, the process requires that it goes through the legislature twice and that they're only amending during presidential elections. We ought to look at that. We have way too many amendments. I'm surprised there's not an amendment that says there can only be one red light in the town of LeCount. I'm sure it's been thought of.
Let me follow up with that. Is anything related to business and industry and taxation that you'd like to see in the Constitution? I don't. I think that if we move policy out of the Constitution, business and industry will do fine. We're going to pay, I love it, I said, we're going to pay our fair share of taxes. You know, it's a cost of business to all of us. If you're in business, all your taxes are a cost of business, and you pass it on. You take all the costs, all the costs that you spend, and say, I have to have that back or I'm not going to be able to open my doors. And then I have to have a little profit to take home and eat. So I'll be honest with you, I don't think there's anything that could help business and industry more than refreshing our Constitution by moving the policy issues out of it and into a superstatute status.
Sir, can you give a couple examples, maybe 3 policies that you believe need to be taken out?
You want some conflict, don't you?
I just want some facts.
3 policies that I think should be taken out. I'll give you a good example. The most controversial. Let's talk about homestead exemptions. It's in the Constitution. I believe in homestead exemptions. I don't believe it ought to be in the Constitution for this purpose. Suppose a Vols parish wants to pass a bond issue. With the exemptions that exist there now, and they pass a bond issue, the Dairy Queen, the John Deere dealership, 2 lawyers and 2 doctors are going to pay taxes because everybody else is exempt. How about this? If it were a law and our legislature said we will from here on out allow for local option of homestead exemptions, then the Vols Parish could say, you know, we really want this. Let's change our exemption process. And they do it. I don't believe we ought to take away the homestead exemption. I believe it ought to be policy. There are a lot of things that shouldn't be taken away. For example, what we were saying, retirement funds. Who in the world is going to pass a law to take somebody's retirement money? It's ridiculous. But it doesn't need to be in a Constitution. It needs to be statute. Because when you start leaving one thing that's policy in the Constitution, everybody else is going to say, me too. But you got to trust your fellow man, especially if you get to elect him or your fellow lady. You ought to trust them.
to have sense, and we're going to be involved in all this. You asked for 3. I gave you the controversial one. Let's talk about civil service. It's a policy. It really shouldn't be in the Constitution. It's necessary. Everybody understands. There's no way in the world you want to do. In fact, I know a lot of legislatures, and they will not get rid of their staff. Because when they get there, they lay it around and say, this is what you do. But the fact of the matter is, civil service was started back when that was a policy where I'm going to run for office. If I get elected, I'm going to hire you as my aide. And so we get people with great qualifications and good experience losing their job because their guy didn't win. So civil service works, but it can be modified. If you make more than $100,000 a year, do you really need civil service? You're qualified, talented, and able. If you're not, you're going to do your job. You don't need to be protected by it. It's just a policy that needs to be in statute. I don't think it ought to be eliminated. Is that enough conflict for you? Yeah, they say I'm going to be crucified. Please, sir.
Can you talk a little bit more about why you think it's so important to have it on a November ballot? You just said that you started out saying that most people don't really understand constitutional issues anyway. So why not, would be wrong to have it on the ballot in, say, March? We might, I'm just picking a month. We might have a smaller electorate, but it'd be an electorate more focused on the constitutional issue, as opposed to people who are mostly focused on the presidential election.
The primary fairness factor exists. Most people don't go vote in March.
But they can.
Yeah, but they can, but they don't. And to me, if you're going to have a transformational document that changes the way we govern ourselves, which is what we truly need, then I'd like for it to be in front of everybody and have everybody come and vote on it and decide for it. It's the American way.
You said, I think it was something along the lines of voters are tired of this smorgasbord of constitutional amendments. But the advocate also did a poll that showed that rewriting the Constitution is not a priority for most voters.
Did you hear what she said? Rewriting the Constitution is not a very favorable thing. Did you hear me say anything about doing anything except taking items in our Constitution and moving them over to super statute? The only thing I talked about rewriting was in the question regarding if I had my way, would there be things that we also should consider? And I honestly believe that Article 5 should be looked at being rewritten, but only Article 5. But the poll, when you go to people and say, there's a consideration in the legislature for taking your minimum foundation money away from all parishes. Are you for that or against it? And lo and behold, everybody's against it. It's the way you ask questions in a poll that you get the answers with it. And if you're polling for real purpose, you try to put the position exactly the way it really is. But I did read the advocate poll.
Why do you believe that taking things out of the Constitution, it doesn't amount to a constitutional rewrite? Isn't that a matter of semantics?
Well, I guess amending it is a rewrite as well.
We have time for one more question.
Thank goodness.
Let's get one more.
In the back.
I think it's a root cause of the problems we have. A root cause. What do you think the root cause?
I heard the question. You just said we don't have but an hour left. No, that's a deep question. First, I want to suggest this is a fairly erudite group. Root cause requires a lot of peeling back of the onion.
to understand what it is. I'm in a business where when we have an incident, we can spend 3 days on why the pile driving hammer fell. It's complicated when you want to go down to the root cause. And everybody has an opinion. So when you ask me my opinion, I'll tell you what it is and take it for what it's worth. Our state, 200 years ago, was a very poor state, agricultural in nature and rural. In fact, during the Depression, we created a new animal. Google it. It's called the Hoover hog. It's named after President Hoover, and it refers to the fact that during the Depression, people had to end up eating armadillos. Times were hard. But basically, that's all that happened in the Depression for our people, is we didn't have enough food because we were poor already. And we came out of the Depression, and Huey Long stood up and said, hey, wouldn't you like new roads and bridges? I got a way for it to be free to us. We're going to make Standard Oil pay for it. It's not free to us when Standard Oil pays for it. But he convinced everybody, and from that time on, everybody's figured out how to get somebody else to pay for what they wanted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next week, we'll have Jonas Fontenot, the CEO from Mary Bird Perkins, talking on new innovations in cancer services throughout the state. Thank you.